Welcome to the Contagious Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I am Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today on the podcast, my guest is Monica Sarbu. Monica is the founder and CEO of Zeta and also the founder of Tupu. Zeta is a serverless Postgres database that runs in the cloud and gives developers and users a huge number of conveniences around running Postgres in the cloud at scale. Some of these advantages include full text search with fuzziness controls and relevancy boosters, as well as a fully type-safe TypeScript SDK, zero downtime migrations, a GitHub pull request-based workflow where you branch your database with a pull request, and so much more. If you'd like to check it out, go to Zeta.io. And also, today marks the beginning of their launch week, where they're going to be launching a bunch of new goodies. If you want to follow that along as well, that's Zeta.io. In our discussion, we start at where Monica began, just graduating university, building some software, and going from one company to another through various acquisitions, ultimately building what becomes Packetbeat. Packetbeat was a novel monitoring solution that collected metrics by monitoring network traffic passively. At the time of Packetbeat's release, the status quo, the way to do it was to have applications in the application code report their metrics to some ingestion service, right? But with Packetbeat, it can just infer those metrics automatically, passively, based on monitoring network traffic. This was really cool and was pretty successful. This product was eventually acquired by Elastic, and Monica with it, becoming a director of engineering at Elastic. It later became part of the Elastic Beats suite of products. Eventually, Monica would recognize some user interface complexity, which Kibana would help with, also part of the Elastic stack, and understand the value of user interface and open source. All of this leading to being a precursor for Zeta, which is fundamentally a beautiful user interface that gives you a comfortable way of working with Postgres, similar to Airtable, however, with a number of different conveniences as well for developers, as we talked about. In our discussion, we go through what it takes to build Zeta, we do some technical deep dives, and we really understand the product inside and out. If you're interested in Postgres, its ecosystem, building a serverless database, or more, this episode is for you. But also, there's another component to this episode that is arguably, to some, more important. Monica is a female founder and CEO with an all-female board behind the company and nearly 50% gender diversity and representation in the company, which is absolutely enormous given the criticism the tech industry often receives for its lack of diversity. So in our discussion, we explore these things in some detail. We look at how you can hire in such a way that women want to join your company. As a spoiler, if you have a team of like 10 men, women are going to be less likely to even want to join you, right? So starting that from early days is really important. Monica shares her thoughts on how she maintains this diversity and how she optimizes for not just diversity, but employee happiness. We also discuss hiring for diversity, not just to fill a quota, but there should also be equivalent merit. We discuss all of the nuance between this. So if you're interested in diversity and inclusion and equity, this episode is also for you. Honestly, I enjoyed this discussion a lot, and I can't wait to hear that you did as well. Now, I'd like to offer this to all of you at no cost. However, this is separate to my day job, and there are costs involved. To offset these costs, we have partners and sponsors. Let's take a moment to acknowledge them. The Contagious Code Podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters teaches you how to level up your coding skills by having you re-implement tools that you use every day in a language that you know. For example, Git, Redis, Docker. These are tools we use as developers, and with Code Crafters, you re-implement them from scratch in a language that you're comfortable with, like JavaScript or Python. In doing this, you get better at JavaScript or Python, but also you get better at the tool you're implementing by understanding more of its mechanistic undertones. If you'd like to use it, there's a free tier, but if you want to start paying, you can get up to 40% off using the link in the show notes. That's tej.as/codecrafters. The Contagious Code Podcast is also partnered with Stately. Stately has a visual tool that helps you model the change of state through your application. You can model each state and the transitions between them in state machines and state charts. Once your state machine looks good, you can export it to code where you fill in business logic for the transitions between states, saying how your application goes from state A to state B, specifically for your business. And it makes your application deterministic and robust, just fulfilling a stateful contract, as it were. They also have a framework for creating agent workflows with AI with guardrails. If you'd like to try that out, go to stately.ai. The Contagious Code podcast is also partnered with That Conference. That is a series of multidisciplinary tech conferences that happen twice a year, once in Texas, once in Wisconsin, in the United States. They attract really great speakers and attendees. It's a conference for the whole family, and they have some of the best keynotes around. If you'd like to attend that conference for free, we do have a raffle. Just share this episode on social media, say you want to attend, and you will enter that raffle. Thank you for sticking around, and now for my discussion with Monica Sarbu. Monica Sarbu, what an honor having you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm so excited. We've been in the middle of founder and CEO season for a while, for a few months now. We've had people like Guillermo Rausch and Matt Billman and a bunch of folks from Zeta's cap table. But you're the first woman founder CEO. So thank you for being a part of this. It's so good to get some folks who aren't men on the season. I'd love to, before we go further, I'd love to talk about things like Zeta and Elastic and Tupu and all of this. But for those who maybe haven't heard of you, can you do a little bit of an introduction to yourself, your background, and then we can go from there?
Yeah, definitely. So I studied computer science, and now I'm currently CEO of Zeta and founder of Zeta. And Zeta is a Postgres database platform, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it more later.
Great. You studied computer science. That's better than me and most of the listeners. Fantastic. Now, what we do on the podcast is we draw lines from, I like to think of it as like a graph data structure. So like you have nodes and we just draw edges between them. So Zeta is the destination, but how did we get to Zeta? And I know a little bit, obviously I used to work there. I also read the TechCrunch articles, and it started with Packetbeat, if I understand correctly. This was your startup. This was your product that you created. Am I accurate so far?
Not really. So everything started with me, finishing university, and then I worked for this startup in Berlin, and we are building a monitoring solution for the telecom space. And this company was acquired twice. First was acquired by a company in the US, and then was acquired by Oracle a few months afterwards. And this was a moment when I decided to quit my job and start Packetbeat. And what I think is important is that when I started Packetbeat and trying to figure out what exactly I want to build, I wanted to kind of use all my knowledge at that point in building monitoring solutions. And kind of the goal was to build a more general monitoring solution, no, not for the telecom. And this is how Packetbeat started. And we're looking, so I built this agent that was looking at the network traffic and kind of collecting information. And I chose this way because this is what I had experience with from this monitoring solution for the telecom. And
interesting.
Yeah, we can.
So out of university, you built some software or you joined this company that was building telecom software. That's so interesting. And then it went through two acquisitions.
Yes, it went through two acquisitions.
What was that like? Was there, because so from what I've heard from a lot of people, acquisitions are messy. For example, when NPM, I think a very famous story is when NPM, so the node.js package manager, got acquired by GitHub. A lot of people had to make some adjustments, and a lot of people left after that. I don't know how else to say it. So can you speak a little bit to the transition, what that was like, and how you navigated that? I mean, it sounds like you stayed for a little while.
No. So when the Oracle acquisition was announced, first of all, was announced internally inside the company. And I said, I don't want to work for Oracle. So, I mean, this was me when I was 20 something years old. And then I wanted to, I decided to just quit my job before being officially on the Oracle payroll.
Right.
And
okay.
This was a motivation for me to start a new company and start from zero. And this is how I started Packetbeat.
Why did you not want to work for Oracle? Why did you not want to work for Oracle?
I don't know. So my specialty in university was kernel development, and I don't know. I was very very Linux oriented person, and I don't know, for some reasons Oracle was not in the picture at that time.
This is so, so we have an episode with the founder and CEO of Terzo database. Terzo is very close to Zeta as a product. We'll get to this later, but Terzo is SQLite at the edge. So it's not a Postgres data platform, it's SQLite at the edge, but it's very similar. And he's exactly the same. He was a kernel developer, very Linux in spirit. And I think this is a trend. I'm seeing a lot of the founders we talk to are people who care more about the like open source side of the world, so Linux, as opposed to the the big corporation. Okay, so that's interesting. So then you decided, okay, I'm going to make this thing. I'm going to make it more general. It's going to be Packetbeat, and it's going to monitor network traffic.
Exactly. And
For
I
for
chose this
the
way. So I chose this way because there was no other monitoring solution on the market that was looking at the network traffic. And the monitoring space at that time, this was 2012, was very, very crowded. And, usually when you start a company, you don't really have the courage to start a company in a space that is very crowded. But I said, no, we're going to do it differently. And all the other companies were looking to and collecting metrics. So that was most of the time, And then, I built a solution, the first prototype, if you want, the first MVP. And it was not open source, it was closed source. And it also, the part that the agent part was not complicated for me, but the front end part was very complicated for me. So I'm not really good in web development, and I'm still not. And this was a struggle, right? So you collect all this data, but how do you show them in a nice way in the UI? And the first version was kind of okay. And when was the time to find customers to work with them to develop the product, then I realized the market is too crowded. They're already using so many monitoring solutions that are there for many years, so it's hard for me to to sell the product. So then I decided to change a bit the strategy, and I made it open source. I made the agent open source, and then I decided to use Elasticsearch. I think even from the first version, I was using Elasticsearch. I don't remember that, to be honest. And then what I did, I used Kibana for the UI, which was a really huge, made a huge difference for me because, like I said, I was not really good in building UI, but adding plugins to Kibana was much easier, right? I was able to build an end-to-end solution much easier. So I did open source the agent, and it had a huge popularity back then. And the building a community back then was kind of easy because there were not so many open source projects out there. And this was the first time when I've seen the power of open source and how open source can push you forward.
Incredible. This is another thing you have in common with almost every technical founder we talk to is they just believe in open source, and they all had this moment of like when they got to see that and just fell in love with it. You said very many interesting things that I wanted to dive into. For the listeners, just to clarify, you said the space was very packed with monitoring tools, but then you built Packetbeat, which was also a monitoring tool, but for network traffic, right? What
Yeah.
did the other monitoring tools monitor, if not network traffic? What were they monitoring? What made
We were
Packetbeat different?
collecting metrics and logs. Yes, and
Okay,
sometimes
and
logs. Yeah. So
but is collecting metrics not the same as monitoring, or what's the difference?
Metrics is different. So you send the metrics from the application, and with network is very passive. You just look at the network data. You have to decode the network packets and just get the information that you are interested in.
So
And
so it
my goal was imagine that you have a call that goes through multiple processes. And my vision was that I found it really amazing to be able to see, the latency that this call spans in all these processes and how it goes end to end. And this was the goal of.
That's okay. Thank you for that, because I think a lot of people would have had the question of like, wait a second, but you're monitoring metrics, but okay, so instead of applications requiring extra code to push metrics to some logger, you can just observe traffic and get the
Yes,
metrics yourself. That's what
yes,
you. That is so cool. Okay,
yes, that's it.
we'll talk about Zeta in depth a little bit later. But now I have to ask: does Zeta have a feature that displays this? Because Zeta has an API layer. Where you can over which you can communicate with the Postgres database, right? So does Zeta then show you spans from the HTTP layer all the way through to Postgres and back? Or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay, but that's. I feel like this is kind of merging these two. Okay, we'll talk about Zeta a little bit more in a little while. The reason, of course, now for monitoring network traffic is so that you get the metrics just by observing the traffic. You mentioned Kibana and how it helped you by not being such a proficient front end engineer. Our listeners are mostly like web engineers and TypeScript people, so they are very good front end engineers by large. What is Kibana? How does it help?
Yeah, so Kibana is a front-end framework that is basically a company that was acquired by Elastic, and basically an open source project that kind of allows you to build widgets and kind of build widgets with metrics and stuff like this. So you can, it's kind of a, if you want, the interface of a monitoring solution.
Wow. And okay, so they were building the front end, you built the back end, and it just sort of fit
Yes,
together because
exactly.
of open source. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
exactly.
You you mentioned something very interesting, and I'm tying this back to what Matt Billman, founder of Netlify, co-founder of Netlify, said, where you said when you look at a market that is very densely packed, like the metric space, you tend to be a bit afraid because of competition. But on the other side of this coin, if you look at a market that isn't very populated, there's another reason to be afraid, right? Which is, oh, maybe that's not populated for a reason. Maybe nobody wants this stuff. And so, why I'm reminded of Matt Billman is because he started building Netlify before the market existed, right? There was a lot of headless CMSs in the space, so contentful and so on, but there was no easy way to deploy front ends, so the head for the headless CMS. And it was a space that there was no competition because people didn't understand that there was a need. So I guess the question here is, yes, you can be afraid building in a very competitive market. I guess today's market would be AI. Or you could be afraid building in a market that nobody else is building in because there's nothing there. So I guess like why would you choose an empty market? It seems like you chose a market where nobody was very active because you felt bold there. But what prevented you from feeling like nobody wants this?
You mean with Packetbeat?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, with Packetbeat, I wouldn't say that. I mean, we just had a different way of looking at monitoring, but we are competing anyway with all these companies. And by the way, if you think about all the companies that were there, the most successful monitoring solution back then, after 5 years, they were not existing anymore. So it's there were other companies that were starting to grow at that time. I think maybe it's easier if you start in a market that is already crowded, but you bring a new perspective on things.
Right.
Then if you are in a market that you have to build, it's much more complicated because you have to educate the user.
Yeah.
And if you are introducing a new category on the market, it's even more harder, right? You have to.
Yeah.
It's always difficult to build products that don't exist anything similar out there because you don't know how to build them, and it takes much more. You have to do more research, and I think it's more complicated. When there are already similar products, you can just get inspiration from those products.
Yeah.
This works. This is what I like that this company did, and look, we can just
Yeah.
build something similar. And yeah, I think it's people are afraid to start a company in a crowded space, but it helps with building the product, definitely.
Yeah, like I think Apple does this really well. Like they don't say, and like for example with this big AI wave, they don't say anything about AI at all until they watch what everybody is doing, right? And then a few weeks ago they did the Apple Intelligence announcement. a long time, like almost 2 years after the initial wave. So they almost waited for the market to get crowded and then announced something. I think that's so interesting. Okay, so you built Packetbeat using Kibana as a front end, and then later got acquired by Elastic. Is this how did that work? Did Elastic eventually notice, oh, there's people using Kibana? We acquired Kibana. We're going to acquire this thing as well. What did that look like? How long did it take from founding Packetbeat to the acquisition?
2 years. So after 2 years, we started to have a community around it. And basically we had three options. So the first option is to bootstrap the company and put your own money in the company, because you can imagine I put my own money in the company because building open source is something that you don't get a lot of revenue immediately. The second option was to get investment. And we did meet with a few investors back then. The problem, I was based in Berlin. The problem back then was there were not many VCs that really understand B2B type of companies in Berlin. And not to discuss about open source. And, back then, no one believed in open source. No one believed that you can really make money with open source. So it was challenging, but indeed we meet with a few VCs. The third option was to sell the company, which, to be honest with you, I didn't really think of that there is this option. But then we started to have multiple companies were interested to discuss with us, and then we chose to join forces with Elastic.
Okay, this is you bring up a lot of really interesting points around VCs. They didn't see the value in B2B style SaaS products.
Yeah, because most of the VCs in Berlin back then were B2C, not very technical, not very technical. They were not investing in technical companies. Dev tool type of companies, there wasn't, no market for it.
Were these VCs German, or were they international VCs?
Some international and some Germans. Yeah.
Interesting.
For the previous company, we got investment from a German VC.
The reason I ask is because I've lived in Berlin for 10 years now, but every time I hear about VCs, it's usually US based VCs. I still don't know how the VC market in Germany works or is. And there's a whole reputation in Germany, I think actually about Europe, that we're very backward, and the US VCs, invest in dev tools and the future and AI research and all of this. And this is not my words, but this is what people say on social media, is that Europe is living in the last century, and the VC market works very slowly. Can you comment on that at all? Has that been your experience? Of course, you don't have to maybe be as aggressive as the internet about it. What is your take on that?
I mean, I always say that in Europe, companies are 5 years behind, or things are behind the US. Everything in the VC market, the way it happens is that things are changing in the US, and then a few months afterwards, they were also going to change in Europe. So Europe is always behind. I think the VC market in Berlin and Europe in general changed a lot since 2012, and now there are so many VCs here. It's, I think, even more than 20 or so in Berlin that are investing in dev tool type of companies. So things change incredibly if you think about. So 10 years later, and it's a totally different environment here. And this is mainly because there were other companies that were started here in Berlin. I think it's difficult also. So if you are a German company, it's harder for international VCs to invest in your company. So it's much easier if you are a US company, because you can just invest online if you want. But if you're a German company, so you have a GmbH entity here, then the only way for a US VC to invest in your company is to go to a notary. So physically to go to a notary, somewhere in the US. Sometimes they have to fly to go to the notary in order to invest in a company, in a German company. So this is, I think I've seen a few of those VCs investing in German companies, but I think it's rare.
Yeah.
Because of
Do
the
you feel
competitions.
do you feel that puts German startups at a disadvantage because of that?
I don't think it's. Nowadays it's very common that companies start already with being a U.S. company from the beginning.
Like a
And the
Delaware C
ones
corp?
that Yes, and the ones that are not didn't start from the beginning as a corporation, as a U.S. corporation, then they do the Delaware flip, is called, which is a long process, very expensive process, but it's happening, and companies do this usually. Ideally, will be to do this before the Series A, because
Right.
afterwards it becomes much more expensive to do this.
So to found Packetbeat, before the Elastic acquisition, you built it, you bootstrapped it with your own money.
Yes.
Was that what was the psychological emotional size? Was this scary? Was it money that you were scared to gamble with, or was there just like an excess and I want to try something. Let's go. What was the, because it sounds like, I mean, you went through 2 acquisitions, so there's probably some equity there that enabled that. The reason I'm asking is there's listeners here who are entrepreneurial, who are thinking, should I bootstrap? What should I bootstrap with? What level of risk am I comfortable with? I'm sure you had to wrestle with these questions as well. So anything you answer here will probably help people in a similar space.
I mean, for me, it was no brainer to invest my own company in my passion and my vision. Definitely, I at that time in my life, I was lucky because we had a few exits before, but I think it's important to believe in yourself. And I think at that time in 2012, we didn't really have many options, like I said. So
Yeah.
and you had to deal with what you were able to get, basically investing your own money. Yeah.
And it turned out well. And then at some point, you ended up talking to a number of VCs and companies, and they said, "Hey, we'll buy it." So Packetbeat was acquired, became part of the Elastic family. You went on to work at Elastic on Packetbeat and build it out to be a really great product. From there, how did we get to whatever came next? Was it Tupu or Zeta? I'll let you choose.
Yeah, so I spent 5 years at Elastic, and of course we grew from the monitoring solution to observability. I just want to mention this, that we started to collect metrics, logs, and in the end we had like 7 or 8 of those beats. So we started with Packetbeat, that was collecting packets or looking into packets. But the idea, it's important to have, in order to have a really good monitoring solution, you need to collect as many data from the network, from your applications. And after Elastic, it was the pandemic time, so just the pandemic started, and I wanted to do something good for the society. And initially, I wanted to write a book about how it, like, to kind of help other female leaders to get to help them increase their trust. This is because I've seen so much in my career by talking with many women. I was also going to different conferences, and I had these talks that was this talk that I was kind of successful with was about try to put yourself in the shoes of a woman in tech. And this was, I felt like it was an eye-opening for most of the people. So imagine that giving this talk at a 90% men audience. And I think this was really great. And I've heard so many stories. I think I was very lucky in my career and also in my childhood that I didn't have to deal with problems like this, but most of the other female out there that are in tech are not so lucky. So I wanted to kind of write this book. But the problem with me is that I'm not good at writing. And so I didn't imagine myself writing a good book. And then I thought, it's like I think a book can only give you general advices, and sometimes you need an advice that is specific for your need, right? And I thought mentoring is even better than writing a book. And so I started Tupu with the idea to offer this mentorship platform. So it's a mentorship platform for underrepresented groups in tech, where basically everything I do is that I match a mentor with a mentee. And usually the mentee comes with a list of problems or a problem that they have and kind of get advice. So you as a mentor, you don't really need to kind of have any experience with mentoring. I think it's just listening to the other and try to help them go over a big problem in their career. I think it's much more than helpful, in my opinion.
So this is Tupu, this mentoring platform you're talking about,
Yes,
tupu.io.
Tupu.io. Yeah, so I started Tupu.io, and I was able to gather a few people to help me with building the platform. And it turned out to be a huge success. But this was, if you think about this, is also something that I put my own money in this. Unfortunately, nowadays it's so hard to impossible to build any nonprofit organization. It's so easy to build a for-profit organization because it's easier to raise money. Maybe not so much nowadays, but it used to be easy to raise money. But for a nonprofit organization, unfortunately is very difficult.
Which kind of speaks to what people actually want, right? Which is unfortunately profit. Okay, so you formed this nonprofit, Tupu, to help women and underrepresented people in tech get more confidence, believe in themselves by matching them with mentors and mentees. How has that been in your experience? Meaning, do you find that people are hesitant to approach something like Tupu because there's a narrative of, oh no, I should be able to do it myself? Or are people more like expressive? Are people more like, hey, I'm so glad this exists, I want it now? How do people respond to Tupu? Do you have a big flood of people applying, or is it more that you have to do the outreach?
Yeah, that's a very good question. At the beginning, and this is something I didn't expect, we had so many mentors they wanted to enroll, and people that have high positions in different tech companies, and VP of engineering, like high leaders in different companies. They wanted to help. And at the beginning, it was hard for us. We didn't have enough mentees. We didn't have enough mentees. So we had to go in and do some advertisement to get the right mentees. And then everything started to work. And I'm thankful that I had this friend, and she worked and helped this move forward basically for free. Right. So like I said, this is something that you have to put a lot of effort into this.
Yeah. You made a big transition. As many founders, I feel like the thing with founders is there's always transitions. You go from, for example, if we continue to pick on Billman from Netlify, he went from just being just an engineer building things like Bitballoon to, oh, now I have a company, so now I'm a founder. And then he had a company, but then the company grew, and he's like, oh, now I'm CEO, now I'm a manager, now I'm many different roles. I think it was similar for you, right? You were a student, and then you got this job, and then that was acquired twice, and you didn't want to work for Oracle, so you started your company. But then, okay, so you founded Packetbeat. Packetbeat was great. You got acquired by Elastic, and you went from being a founder to an employee at Elastic. But then in Elastic, you also moved from your position at the time of acquisition to being a director at Elastic. There's many transitions. What has been helpful for you navigating those transitions, and really what was it like? I mean, I think it's a very different skill set, right? To go from an entrepreneur, startup founder to a director. Can we speak to that a little bit?
No, I think it's. I wouldn't say it's difficult. So at Elastic at the beginning, we didn't have titles, and I remember this. And then at some point, we said, okay, now we are introducing titles. And me and Tudor, our CTO, we were leading multiple teams inside Elastic. And we had to decide who is a tech lead and who is a team lead. And this was, I was not sure which one I should pick for myself. And then I went to Shai Bannon, which is a CEO, back then was a CEO, now CTO of Elastic. And I asked him, what should I be? Should I be a team lead or should I be a tech lead? And then he was thinking for a second and he said, you should be a team lead because you are good with people. And this is something that is a harder skill to find in developers. And this is something basically naturally happened that I did the one-on-ones with everyone. And, I was dealing with more the organizational things. And it just naturally happened like this. And this was a moment when I realized, I have to get better and becoming a good manager. And indeed, Elastic grew a lot, and I think this was challenging, right? So we grew so much in a shorter period of time, and you had to kind of overnight, basically, you felt like now I'm leading a team of 10 people, and tomorrow I'm leading a team of 40 people, right? So it felt overnight, and then I try to take a step back and think about what kind of manager I want to become. And it's interesting that my role model was my mom, which I don't think I would have ever said this, but my mom, she was leading the IT department of several hospitals. And, she was writing code, but also being a manager. And, growing up, I felt like, everyone was speaking bad about their boss, but everyone loved my mom. My mom has these huge parties, birthday parties. Everyone was coming with hundreds of people. Everyone was coming with gifts, and our living room was full of flowers. Literally full of our flowers after her birthday party. So, and then I said, like, why people love my mom as a manager? And, you hear this otherwise from your friends and so on. And I said, no, I want to be like her. And then, I was trying to figure out what my mom does in order to be so loved by everyone. And what she does is basically she cares about the people, and people come to her and ask for life advices, and who should I marry, how many kids I should have, things like this. She's always for them, and not only helping them improve on being better at their job and helping them if they have a problem, but also being like a role model for them. So I felt very inspired. I never thought that my mom can be a role model for me, but and this was a moment when I realized that I want to be like this. And that's why I do one-on-ones with everyone. I want everyone to feel like they are part of a team, and we spend a lot of time together. And I really care about each individual person that is in my team.
Yeah, I think that's first of all, wow. I think your mom sounds like a really cool person. I had no idea that she was this coder and manager. I guess it's genetic. I guess you're just I wonder if your kids at some point will just be like great coders and engineers. And this also, I understand now with Zeta, fast forwarding to the future, why you spend so much time together. I've been on the offsites myself. I know that offsites are a huge priority to the company, and that's probably why, right? You do 2 offsites a year, and from what I hear and see, they're the best offsites from any tech company ever because of who organizes them. In any case, I want to ask you about. I want to ask you about being the director, this mentor like your mom at Elastic. You said your mom used to like counsel people, teammates, and they would come to her with all these like personal questions. How do you feel about the divide between, and this is now, as the CEO of Zeta, as a director of engineering at Elastic, etc. How do you feel about boundaries between personal and professional. And nobody knows, right? There's no right or wrong answer. There's no rules about this, but some people tend to be very like reserved. Like, okay, I'm here. This is work. I'm not going to talk to you about my family. That's none of your business. And other people, like you said, are very open. They're just like, hey, how many children should I have, manager? Um, what's what do you think is better for the individual, so that is the person working at the company, and then also for the company and for the manager? I mean, there's three parties involved here, right? There's the person, there's the manager, there's the company. What's the best way for each?
So I think the goal that you have to have as a manager is that you have to really, like, the priority is that I'm always saying like this, you have to make your people happy in the company. So you need to be happy in the company, and and then, so for example, the way I do the one-on-ones are very different depending on the person. So like you said, some people like to talk more about personal stuff. Some people are not so interested. Some people don't like to talk so much. So you always have to adjust. So your goal, you need to always think of like, okay, what I should do in order to make them happy. And I spend a lot of time, for example, in my one-on-ones, trying to motivate people. I think this is the most important thing, that I feel like, my strategy, if you want, as a manager, is that we hire the best people in the world, and then we get them. And then my goal is to support them, motivate them that they are able to do things that even themselves don't believe they can do. I think this is a very important strategy that I have, and I've been doing it for many, many years. And in the end, you can't do this unless the person is happy. So happiness, I know it maybe sounds strange, but being happy and being comfortable with the team is very key. I've seen people that outperform in my teams just because they are in my teams and not compared to the previous companies. So I think this is important.
Yeah, no, this is so good. And again, I see why Zeta places so much priority on offsites and spending in-person time together, because it's just different. And when you develop that level of comfort, you can unlock some things. This reminds me of CJ Silverio, who is the former CTO of NPM. I mentioned NPM earlier, and they got acquired by GitHub. So CJ, just absolute, very, very smart person, a great engineering leader, says that they've never seen an engineer on their team who is well rested and healthy and eaten, and they like all the lifestyle factors are taken care of. They've never seen a person who's healthy and happy fail to solve a technical problem. But they've seen a lot of people who are maybe very educated and very, quote unquote, intelligent, but if they're unhappy, they just don't perform, as you said. So I think, yes, happiness and satisfaction enables outperforming in a big way. And I think that's so cool that you called that out. You mentioned at Elastic, when after the acquisition, at some point, there was no titles, but they introduced titles. Okay, now it's time to introduce titles. In the startup space, there's a lot of discussion around, we have a flat hierarchy, we have no hierarchy, we have no titles, but this doesn't last. Usually, at some point, you introduce a hierarchy and titles. At Zeta, I remember working there. By the way, you said you hire the best people in the world. I was hired there. This is so cool. I feel validated. But we had titles from early on. Why? And maybe can you speak a little bit to this no titles and then titles and flat hierarchies?
Yeah, so back then we thought that it's really important to have a flat hierarchy, because what you want to achieve with a flat hierarchy is basically everyone feels comfortable to share their ideas, to share their opinions, to say if something doesn't feel right. And this is how we thought that we can achieve it, right? And then by introducing titles at some point, it caused a lot of problems, because imagine that someone has to become a senior manager and someone has to become a director manager, right? So leveling is hard, and then it causes problems all the time. Why do I get only the director and I'm not getting the VP, and all these discussions, right? Not everyone is interested in titles, but some of the people, and especially if you have a big company, this happens, right? And it causes a lot of issues. So that's why at Zeta, I think it's important from the beginning to introduce titles. And for example, I'm very strict in defining objective decision and how to define the leveling of an individual, because you don't want to have, everyone should be treated the same. I'm very, you can imagine being the female founder. For me, it's important, to have this. And I always, since I'm a manager, I'm always careful about this kind of stuff.
Interesting. So Zeta had titles from day one because it. I'm not sure I understand. I heard that with titles, there's a lot of complexity, right? For example, you said, why am I, a director and not a VP and so on? But at the same time, Zeta had titles from the beginning. How do we reconcile those? And also, I guess the big question on my mind, and I think the listeners' minds, is when you don't have titles. So indeed, when you have a flat hierarchy, you maybe run the risk of too many discussions, too many opinions, as opposed to, but maybe, and I'm thinking out loud here, maybe that's a good thing because everybody feels involved, as opposed to everybody being a number, right? Just do what the director says. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so it's true that we have titles. We had titles from the beginning, but the problem that we want to kind of feel like we have a flat hierarchy, we solve it differently. So that's why I do one-on-ones with each individual. That's why I have this approach that I want to make everyone comfortable to come to me and share if there is a problem. And people do come to me, maybe not to me or a colleague or a manager. We have a manager in the company. They come to someone and share, and they feel comfortable to speak up. I think this is important. And then, when we're going to kind of have a discussion, for us, we take the decision that is best for that technical discussion.
Right.
As a result, we don't really take a decision because the director said or the based on the title, right? I think this is very important that you don't take decisions based on the title, and everyone feels comfortable. Now it's when you hire, I think it's when you hire people on that, with that level, they don't, for example, if you give them a lower title, then it's a good opportunity for them to be promoted. Maybe, each company has a different way of leveling people. And we have people that are coming as senior from other companies, and then we promote them to staff.
Excellent. We're about to talk about Zeta only in a few minutes, but this is the last question, sort of, that's Zeta adjacent, which is about Tupu. Two questions. One is, do you feel like there's been a strong synergistic relationship between your work at Tupu and Zeta or Packetbeat as a manager? I have to assume there's an overlap, right, between mentoring at Tupu and then being a manager at Zeta or being the CEO at Zeta. That's question number one. Question number two is, what is the state of Tupu like today, like right now? Is there still more mentors than mentees? Is it still struggling to raise funds, etc.? So I'll let you answer those two, and then we'll dive into Zeta.
Definitely. The experience at Tupu didn't really apply to being a CEO at Zeta because they are totally different skills. But the idea of Zeta came out of the necessity of building the platform. So when we were building the mentorship platform, we realized there isn't any database solution out there that can provide us with all the functionality. And imagine that everyone is just trying to help out and doesn't have enough time. And they prefer to spend all their time in building the mentorship platform, but not building the database platform. So, for example, because we wanted to have just full text search, we didn't want you to have to add another data store like Elasticsearch and synchronize the data from Postgres to Elasticsearch and then add Kafka. So it becomes too complicated. And I said, I think in this century, it's not really possible to really, even dare to spend so much resources in building the database platform instead of building the mentorship platform. So this is how basically I realized there is a huge opportunity for us to in the database space to start a new journey to kind of build this database platform that allows you to build faster applications, but also to manage easier your database, because companies usually they need to have multiple data stores in their infrastructure, and it's hard to hire people that can manage all and have knowledge about all these data stores. So basically, we want to help them be more efficient and move faster forward, so they can concentrate all their resources in building their core application.
Right.
And unfortunately, the status of Tupu is not very good. So now we are basically in the situation where we have to close the company because my friend, she decided to go and have a full-time job. You cannot really, but it's this is what I said is very difficult to build a nonprofit organization. And because I don't have so much time now, so much free time, it's hard for me to even continue with Tupu.
So I wonder if Zeta was already a product at the time of Tupu, if Tupu would have a different future, right? Because as you said, it's because there's not so much time to build this thing out, and also build the tech needed to facilitate it, to build the database, to build the search, to build etc. And that's I think it's so cool how that's why Zeta exists. For anyone else on Earth, teams or individuals who want to build something like Tupu, they will have that. They will have the database, the search, etc. In so many ways, would you agree with the statement that Zeta exists because of the need you discovered while building Tupu? So you sort of felt the pain and you said, okay, we're going to fix this, not just for us, but for everybody else.
100%. 100%. Yes, definitely. So I think if I wouldn't have started Tupu, Zeta wouldn't have been existed.
Wow. We've done such a good job you've done such a good job of drawing the line here, like from university to the Oracle thing to Packetbeat to Elastic to Tupu, and now we've arrived at Zeta. I was, what was it, employee number 6, I think, at Zeta, right? A long time ago. 2 years ago, 2 years, 3 years, something like this. And so when I got the message from you, I was very happy because I was very unhappy at Spotify. But from there, we were building I remember it was an Airtable-like spreadsheet UI database. A lot has happened since then. It's now a Postgres data platform. Can we talk about that journey? So the journey of like, we're going to build this Airtable-like thing to what it is today, meaning it is a Postgres first platform.
Yeah. So initially, when I started the company and I was pitching the idea to investors, the way I was pitching is that it's something between Airtable and a traditional database.
Yeah.
So basically, what I want you to say of this is that you get the usability of Airtable and you put it on top of a traditional database. I think there are so many things that you can improve in the database space to make it easier. My vision is that in like 5 years from now, you are gonna have companies will be able to spend or build their product with less resources just because of having a database platform out of the box as a SaaS service. So I think this empowers the companies that will come on. So that's why I thought it's like now it's a good time to start this in order to be there in, let's say, 5 years from now or maybe less than that, when companies will be more powerful and be able to build a company like a very heavy technical company with 10 or 15 people, unless currently you have to hire 50 people or so. So I think this is where I envision that where the market is going. So yeah, and then initially we decided to build a platform on top of Postgres and Elasticsearch. So Elasticsearch because we wanted to provide a full text search out of the box, but we didn't envision SQL as part of a modern database. So we wanted to have our own API that is easier to integrate with. That it's easier. You have a single API that you can query the data in Postgres, but also the data in Elasticsearch. And fast forward, like the most requested feature from our customer was to give direct access to Postgres and be able to query over SQL. And this is what we did, right? We have to listen to our customers, and now we give direct access to Postgres. So basically, you can use SQL to query the database. While we still have all the functionality that we are building from the beginning. So you have files, attachment files, images as another data type in the database. We have schema migrations with zero downtime, and you have this usability with this Airtable view, like the spreadsheet-like UI that it was really key for us while we were at Zeta, while we are at Tupu, because it's easier to see and visualize the data.
You mentioned wanting to couple, and this is before, in the beginning, of course, you wanted to couple Elasticsearch with Postgres to provide full text search. But doesn't Postgres already have full text search? I'm not the smartest about database theory. A lot of people say, yes, there is full text search in Postgres, but don't use it. Why?
So indeed, so Postgres, you can kind of simulate a full text search experience with Postgres, but it's not so advanced as you can get with Elasticsearch. For example, you don't have the fuzziness. So I think for small companies or small projects, they usually prefer to just use Postgres for full text search. But if you scale or if you really want to, it's important for your application to have a really good experience in the full text search. Then I think you really need to have Elasticsearch. Of course, there are multiple ways how you can have full text search in your applications. Algolia is one option that basically they specialize in this, in offering, it's a SaaS service and offers full text search. But most of the companies that try with Algolia, they stop using it because it's too expensive. So some companies, especially smaller ones, they cannot really afford to use Algolia. And then the alternative is to add another data store. For example, they have Postgres and they have to add another data store just to have full text search. And in order to do that, it's really complicated. You have to replicate the data from Elasticsearch, from Postgres to Elasticsearch, and probably you need Kafka, and basically you need at least a person to be comfortable and knowledgeable about all the services in order to make this happen.
Yeah, and that person is probably going to cost tens of thousands a year, as opposed to, I don't know, like $29.99 a month.
Exactly.
On a service like Zeta.
Yeah, so
Fantastic.
this basically started with my frustration. There are so many web applications out there that have a really basic full text search, and I think we can do much better.
Yeah, and I've used the full text search. Actually, the full text search in Zeta is the best full text search I've ever used. I think that's not a secret, especially because of the fuzzy matching, but also the boosters. So for those who don't know Zeta, I'd encourage trying it out, because you can say when a full text search matches, weigh this column heavier than that column, and that's so cool. So you can also do multi-direct. And this is not a pitch for Zeta. Maybe it should be, but like you can not only can you weight different columns differently, but you can also do multi-column search, which I think is so cool. And you can indeed model all of this in SQL and do it in Postgres native. But I think the problem with Postgres is also it's normalized. So you don't, it's slower because of relationships and foreign keys and so on. Whereas if you replicate into Elastic and all of that's hidden behind Zeta, it becomes much more comfortable. Great. Okay, so you moved from the hosted behind the HTTP API to being able to directly interface with it over the Postgres protocol. That is so interesting. For many reasons, but it sounds like it's just because users asked for it. What are users currently building with and on Zeta?
I think it being in the Postgres ecosystem, because now basically we're another Postgres company, we also have the advantage that it's easier to be adopted. So companies that have already, you know, bigger applications it's easier for them to move to Zeta. Before we had our own API, so they had to change their application in order to move to us. So that's why for us at the beginning at Zeta, we targeted builders in order to get those companies that are starting now to build their application. And with Postgres, basically, we kind of enlarge our ecosystem and our potential that we can get not only smaller like builders, but also larger organizations that are already using Postgres. And it's crazy if you think about that. Postgres is out there for 30 years, and Postgres is the most loved database nowadays, and it's growing in popularity. And I think it's incredible.
Yeah, I agree. It's so cool because I think it is the most popular relational database in the world. So what you're talking about, the migration story, I'm going to tell you what I suspect is possible, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong. Because you offer full Postgres interop with Zeta, what that means is if I have some company that I've been running for, I don't know, like 20 years, and I have my own Postgres infrastructure, then to migrate to Zeta, I can, in theory, just PG dump my
Exactly.
previous thing and then PG restore into Zeta, and it should just work. Is that accurate?
Exactly. Yes. So
Oh
it's
my
much
goodness.
easier, right? Of course. I mean, for now, we don't really have like an easier way to do this, but of course, we are planning to make it even easier to migrate to us, not only from Postgres, but also from other SQL stores. But that's something that we need to spend some time on it.
That
So
is incredible.
basically, our goal at Zeta is that we speak with a lot of customers trying to figure out like what are their main pain points with Postgres, and we are trying to solve them one by one, and we are prioritizing them and kind of taking one by one and try to build this database platform that guides you what will be the best scenario to run Postgres and helps you with schema migrations, with major upgrades with zero downtime, and also helps you because we support branching functionality. It helps you so you can have a branch for your staging, for your development, for your production. So the idea is kind of to make it easier for companies to move forward and also iterate easier with their applications. For example, currently, I think it's not really possible. So companies, the way they do schema migration, or for example, when they are building a new feature that requires them to do any changes to their schema, they kind of have a written manual or rules what they can change and what they cannot change. So, for example, it's not really allowed to change the type of a column. You can only add columns, and companies that have been there for many years, they have lots of columns because for every feature that they add another column. So with our approach, so we started PGRoll, which is an open source project that helps you with schema migration, zero downtime. And we have a unique approach in the sense that it offers you the old schema and the new schema in the same time. So basically, you can try out the new schema, and for example, if it fails for some reasons, you can also roll back without any problems. So this is, allows you to easily do iterations in your application without thinking of did I change the type of a column or things like this. I think this in my opinion is one of the biggest advantages that we bring so
Yeah.
far.
So Zeta gives you, it sounds like, a ton of like developer experience goodies on top of traditional Postgres. And you mentioned many of them. You mentioned the spreadsheet style UI, the fuzzy and multi-column and weighted search with boosters. The TypeScript SDK is, I actually really like it. So a lot of these niceties, the migration story is now easier because you can just PG dump, PG restore, and ideally you add like some listen, notify style hooks to your legacy thing, so you don't miss any stuff that happens in between the migration. And then of course the zero downtime migrations, such that when you open a pull request that changes the schema, you can speak to the sort of pending or the next version of the database. How does this scares?
More
I feel
and more of
there. There's
There's more,
more. Okay.
right? Yeah, we also have this idea of ChatGPT on your data, and
Oh,
like I said, we also have this story of moving the data to Elasticsearch for full text search.
yeah, but about the like PG role, zero downtime migrations. It scares me. It scares me a little bit, and I think the developers listening, because what if the scenario happens such that you've merged your database branches, but I have to assume this merge isn't instant, right? So while a migration is being run, a write comes in from a user. How does Zeta manage that?
That's why we offer the old schema and the new schema in the same time. So basically, your application, the new application, and the old application can access the same database without failing. So you can try it out, and then if it's not working, you can easily roll back to the previous state. So that's why
But
it kind of gives you a bit of a reassurance that this won't fail.
interesting. I'm still having a hard time understanding this because while the migration is happening, say in production,
Mm-hmm.
there's maybe 100 concurrent users using the application in production. I think the equivalent is like an application like Google Docs, right? That will persist writes by like 8 people. If the database migration is being run and it can take time. Oh, but you did mention zero downtime. I guess in this case, what does zero downtime mean? How does that even work? Where do writes go while a write is happening?
Yeah, basically no downtime.
Wow, that's okay. How and
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah, so that's why I said that we have a unique approach. You can go and check it out. So
Okay,
it's an open source project that we have, and soon it will be part of Zeta with the next launch. So I can tell you that we have some incredible demos with it.
that is so cool. PG roll. Okay, and so right now
Yes,
it's not part of Zeta, but it will be.
yes,
Wow,
soon, very soon.
fantastic.
And with the
When
next launch, we are also launching a few other open source projects. So just keep an eye on our GitHub repository for that.
we will do that, do you have a date yet for these launches or no?
Yes, we have, but we are not sharing the
Oh, come on. Okay, okay. Well,
soon. Let's say very soon.
fantastic. We'll try and publish this just before the launch. Okay, great. So it sounds like Zeta is this company that marries sort of traditional best practices, so Postgres, I mean the de facto standard, with like modern developer experience. This is not to say the developer experience of Postgres is bad. It's maybe just not modern. Postgres has been around for 30 years. Um, how has that paid off? The question being, is it worth? And the reason I'm asking is there's a constant discussion in open source and in specifically web engineering between the right abstraction, right? Like, does DX, does developer experience matter, or does UX matter? Meaning, if your end user, your customer has a great e-commerce experience, then I don't care about what your developer tooling looks like. You could have everything could be Java and object oriented and like 20 years old. Has the investment in DX shown that it can then accelerate UX and create actually a better product for the end user, not the developer?
From my experience so far, 20 years or I don't know, I didn't count, DX experience doesn't matter. So everything you do, even if it doesn't have a UI, all the time the products that you are building that are easier to use win. Just because people just want to be successful in a shorter period of time, and this is, I think, key to the success of a product. So I think in our case, developer experience does matter because it saves the time of the engineer. For example, though usually how companies do is that they have to go and find consultants to help them with optimize the queries, find consultants to kind of teach them to do this and that. So And hiring consultants is very expensive, right? So it's also a struggle for those companies to build a database platform. And when they scale, they always feel like, okay, now we cannot really move forward with our product because we are stuck in the database space. So database is kind of key to the product. So you're right. It's important for them, for those users, because they are not exposing our functionality to their users, but it makes them more efficient. It makes them have more time to concentrate on their product instead of finding different consultants to help them. And it helps them, I think AI will have a big impact on this. The idea of AI is that you become more successful as an engineer. So you don't, ideally will be to reduce the manual steps that you have to do in order to do anything, right? And this also applies to databases. And I think we have so many ideas that we can build on top of the platform. It's just that we have to do a bit of planning and prioritization, which one should go first. But I think the end goal is amazing, right? So you have this tool that kind of helps you be more successful with databases in general.
Totally. I've used a number of database as a service style companies. I've used Tupu, for example, and I think Zeta is one of the best. I actually use, a lot of people don't know this, but if you go to my website, tej.as, and you do the search, so we have this very cool podcast search that is AI enabled. All of that is built on Zeta. It uses Zeta's vector search capabilities, which is so cool. So I think the reasons to use Zeta, especially now that you get full Postgres compatibility, is very compelling. But I want to hear from you, and I think the listeners would appreciate hearing from you. What are some cases where people shouldn't use Zeta?
I wouldn't say there are things that I shouldn't use Zeta. I think the problem with building any database company out there is that the biggest struggle is that you need to have all the functionality in order to be used in real use cases by the users. So it's much more difficult to build a database company than, for example, any other dev tool where you can basically bring some functionality or help a bit with a specific feature. But when you have a database, it's the struggle is that you need to have all the functionality. And we are trying to be there, but there is still some work to do in order to kind of have all the functionality that companies need in order to kind of freely, use a database without any limitations. Definitely being Postgres, it helps us move faster in that direction because Postgres already supports most of the functionality. So we can move basically now with this approach that where Postgres helps us move much faster than previously. I mean, this happens like imagine that you are a database company that starts a database from scratch. It's a really long time for them to build all the functionality. That's why for me, from the beginning, was really important not to start a database from scratch because you don't want to be able to launch in 5 years or so. It's like things change so fast nowadays that in 5 years might be a different trend on the market.
Yeah, definitely. When I was working at Zeta, I had a lot of questions from people, and maybe there's an answer now, who wanted to quote unquote own their data. This is like enterprise people who they have to run their software on their infrastructure. Or on, maybe one layer removed. So in an AWS data center. Can you do that yet with Zeta? Does Zeta expose sort of multi-cloud functionality? Or even better, does Zeta give you self-hosting capabilities or not yet?
Not yet. So we are trying to have everything in the cloud because it allows us to move much faster. When you are building an open source, product, and then also you have a SaaS offering. It feels like you have two companies in one. And basically, we have the open source project, I think it's important that I mentioned that we try to build all the functionality that we have on a native Postgres, because this is what people want, like not like fork of Postgres, they want native Postgres, because most of the trend that is happening is companies are moving from MongoDB or Oracle, just because, there is closed source from Oracle especially, right? And they want to have this freedom of, have full open source, and they prefer to move to Postgres. So it's very important for us to offer all the functionality on native Postgres. Currently, we only offer Aurora, AWS Aurora. So we are basically offering all this functionality, and we use ourselves. We don't run Postgres ourselves. We use Aurora in order that it gives us more functionality. We are also planning to add RDS, just because RDS is cheaper and most of the people out there are using RDS. But if we also offer the option that you can come with your own cloud. So for enterprise plans, so you can basically, if you already have negotiated with AWS for for a specific prices, then we can also install in your own cloud if there are problems like you mentioned.
Great. So it sounds like it's very close to being self-hostable, especially because of the bring your own cloud. There has to have been some level of white labeling to get there. And so, okay, good. It sounds like it's on the roadmap, but as you mentioned, it's just a matter of prioritization and picking the right thing. And I think it makes sense, because if you offer, as you said, an open source, like a Docker Compose style piece of software now, while it's still rapidly evolving, you'll have to maintain two things. And so what I understand is you're building the product to a level of maturity, and then when it's mature, we can think of, okay, this is sort of more or less there. Now let's see what we can do to enable people to self-host it. I think that I can see how that would help you move faster.
So currently we don't have the plan to self-host it, in the sense that to run it on-prem. I personally prefer to keep it on cloud, just because it allows you to easier do upgrades and everything. I've been here in this boat where you kind of need to build, provide packages for different operating systems. And this sounds easy, but actually it's very complicated. So we prefer to stick to the cloud. And the idea that we have is that we are building all these open source projects, and each open source project is solving a specific problem that people have with Postgres. So they run against Postgres. So if you want, you can run it yourself against your own local Postgres. And then we have the Zeta service that kind of gives you an out-of-the-box experience, and it's using the open source projects that we have been releasing publicly. So the idea, larger companies, very large enterprises, usually they are they kind of very picky. You want to use the open source version. So then we are there to support them to kind of use our own open source offering. And
Right.
for like a small, medium-sized type of companies, we build the Zeta service in order to make them more efficient and easy to scale from day one.
Right. Let's talk about ChatGPT on your data. This feature is very interesting. How does it work? Is it some type of retrieval augmented generation flow, such that Zeta? Actually, I just let you talk about it. How does it work? Where did it come from? Where is it going?
Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't. So we released this, I think, a year and a half ago, and basically the goal was to, at that time, to imagine that you have all your documentation and you can put it in Zeta, and then you can basically have this chat where you can basically ask questions about your documentation. This is something that we use internally to provide ChatGPT on our documentation in Zeta. But we didn't really, I think there are so many things that we could do and move forward with this. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time to kind of do more of this. So this is something that we are planning to work more in the future.
Great. I love and respect how at Zeta the roadmap is public, right? You go to zeta.io/roadmap and you can just see like where are the priorities, what are people doing. That's so valuable. I'd like to start wrapping up, but I wanted to get your thoughts on running a company like Zeta and being a founder as part of Founder and CEO series, because this is people have been listening to this, and I've been asking every founder and CEO the same question to sort of compare answers. And the reason I'm doing this is because it comes out of a discussion I had last year with some founder friends who they were not very prepared for for becoming founders, and they were saying how, look, nobody tells you what to expect. There's no, like, for example, if you look at Postgres, there's or SQL, the language specification. There's documentation. There's like select this from table. It means something, and the language is a specification. People were complaining that there's no like founder CEO specification. There's no document that says like, here's what this means, here's how you raise funds, here's how much funding you accept, here's how much equity to give up, here's how to hire internationally, here's the ratio of diversity. Like, there's no specification, there's no standard. And so these people were very confused. And I said, well, what if we can make a standard? What if we can create like a specification document by just asking many founders and CEOs for what they would add to it, and then extracting the commonalities and putting them in a documentation. Okay, so with that, I wanted to ask you if such a document exists, like the specification for founder CEO, technical founder CEO, what would you add to it that you wish maybe you knew that you wish new coming founders and CEOs should know?
I think, in my opinion, every company is different, and the journey of every company is very different. So I think it's hard to build a common scenario for how the founder should be in order to be successful. I think everything, in order to find product market fit for each company, the path is different. The way to find customers is different. So indeed, I think there isn't any written book about this, but I think what is important, and I see this in many founders out there, you kind of have to kind of make a plan, or not a plan, but how do you envision how you would like your company to be? What's more important for you, right? And how you would like to build a culture in the company. And I think this is something that people don't think about. They don't think about the culture. They think mostly about the product, and if the product is successful, then that's it. Now, I think there are many things around the company that are important in order to lead the company culture, and how you, for example, for us, it's important to have diversity, and we did this. I did spend a lot of time trying to have diversity in the cap table, diversity in the board. So we have 100% female board, as you know. Diversity in the team. So we have 40+% of female in the company, and which is really huge for a company like ours. And it's important, to identify the things that you care about. For me, I think it was easier, just because I was a manager for a long time before, and I tried different things and kind of see what works and what doesn't work. I was not a very organized person. I was forced to be an organized person after I had my baby, and try to have this amount of hours in a day, and you have to learn how to prioritize things. So for me, after having my baby, this was the moment when I started to kind of try to plan my day and things like this. And planning your time, I think this is key this is one of the most important skills for a CEO, right? Because you have to, figure out how to scale a team, figure out what kind of people you need to hire, figure out, there is a lot of people skills that you need to have, but in the same time, I think it's hard for many founders, especially technical founders, that they have to move from one activity to other. For example, I have a meeting with the lawyers, then I have a meeting with the operations team, then I have a meeting about the product. And for me, I'm kind of used to this kind of changing subjects and talk about anything, everything. But for many young founders, I think this is a struggle. I also see many founders struggle with leveling, what type of people to hiring. Hiring is really a problem for most of the founders if they didn't do this before. And yeah, I think there are so many things that you need to have an answer for, and
Yeah.
I think that's why it's hard, because yeah. That's
Yeah.
why I think it's interesting that most of the founders out there are very young. So most of the time they're just, out of university or very young, and they don't have so much experience. And for them, I think it's much harder because they have to accumulate all this experience in a shorter period of time. And other founders like myself, right, that we have we have been doing this for many years, and it's easier for us, right, to adjust and kind of how to do things, but you think you know how to do things, right?
Yeah.
Because every company is different, right? But I feel like founders of my age, usually they don't start companies because they have other priorities. They have a family, and it's hard to find time to start a family. Starting a company is usually risky. So, I think I don't have a percentage, but I see most of the companies are started by younger people. And, there is a reason behind this.
Oh, totally. Yeah, most of the people on this podcast, the founders we have discussions with, started the company in their 20s or 30s, early 30s. So absolutely. I think like Guillermo Rauch started Vercel when he was super young, but even before that, started a company that he then sold to Automatic, the company behind WordPress. So I think like also, I'm now 31 years old. I used to, when I was younger, I used to want to start a company. I don't really want that anymore because I'm more interested in starting a family. So I do think with age you start to sort of go like, yeah, what do I prefer? And your preferences change. So it sounds like I'm going to say back to you what you said to me because I think it is very, very valuable. You mentioned hiring is challenging and it's something people are going to have to get good at. You mentioned timing and prioritization is also important, and it's something people are going to get good at. And the way you get good at it is by having a baby,
No,
right?
this was for me.
So everybody go have a baby. And then I think one very new thing that you mentioned that all of the founders that we've talked to previously haven't mentioned is the importance of having a plan. And I want to dive into this a little bit. You said you have to sit and think about and write down even the kind of company you want. And you mentioned at Zeta you value diversity. So you have this all women board. You have 40+% of female representation. So it's almost 50%, which I think is actually very, very cool and huge for a database company. What more is this plan for Zeta? As in, you seem to have this plan, and you've mentioned diversity. I'm curious what else went into it. Is this plan something you're comfortable talking about publicly, or
I
is it
think
more
that
just for you?
Yeah, I think that another plan that I have, if I can say like this, is the vision, right? I imagine this. I'm a big fan of Datadog, for example. I think they build a platform where they offer you everything you need. I think this is the final goal for us. I really hope that with our vision and our longer term goal is that we can really help people, because this is what we want in the end, to make databases feel easy. Because, I think this is, with AI, I think databases should also move forward and have this evolution and try to not have people have manual tasks anymore, do manual tasks anymore, right?
Interesting.
So that's, I always have this vision. I think product and make it easier to use. This is also part of the vision. But I think every founder is different, right? So for me, because there are not so many female founders out there, as you mentioned, I feel like more. I feel like this pressure on my shoulders, right? That
I can
I have
imagine.
to prove that things are going well and we grow female leaders in the company. I think this is important because, the main reason why I started Tupu is that 50% of female engineers drop out of their job after 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And this is crazy, right? If you think about, and the main reason is,
Men.
childcare support and culture. And,
Yeah.
we need to change that as a society.
Totally. I was just at a conference yesterday, and the closing keynote was by this really great female speaker, Amanda Martin, her name is, and she'll probably be a guest on the podcast. And we were sort of backstage, and she mentioned that it's very important to her when she does a public talk on a stage, to wear a dress, specifically a dress, because she's like, look, I need to show the other women in the audience that you don't have to dress like a man to be taken seriously in tech. And I think that's very much in line with what you're saying, right? Like there seems to be this unfortunate culture where if you can't be a woman in tech because you either have to look like a man or sound like a man or talk like a man for men to take you seriously. Is that accurate? And so you feel this pressure to fix that. For Amanda, it's wearing a dress, among many other things, of course, publicly on stage. For you as the founder and CEO of Zeta, besides raising up women leaders, what are some ways you're doing that to help bridge that gap? And again, I think to bridge the gap, it can't just be like men, right? It has to be more than that. What are some ways, not just, what are some ways you're doing that, but also for the listeners, what are some ways the women listening can help change that narrative?
I think it's important to support them, and I think it's important not to treat them different than you treat because like we are hiring here the best people in the world, like I mentioned this to you earlier, and we are not making any exception, right? I think this is very important. And there are companies that are hiring female engineers, and they let them do other stuff just so they have a specific percentage in the company. And I think this is not good in my opinion. So I think just by empowering them and letting them do what they are good at. I mean, I'm really surprised to see we have all the female engineers in my company. They are leading projects and they are doing a fantastic job. And this makes me so proud. And, they were struggling. Some of them were struggling the previous job. Some or had like really bad experiences. And it's incredible that you see them flourish just because you believe in them and then you support them and you let them, lead and have the power that they can have, right? And I think this is just enough, in my opinion.
But how do you do that without exceptions? The reason I'm asking is because like sometimes you have a time constraint. You want to fill a position. You need to fill like a senior engineering, whatever it may be, job. And for every like one female applicant, there's 50 male applicants. And a big part of this is because women actually read the job description. I know I have it on good authority. I'm a man myself. Men just don't read this. They see like one word, JavaScript. Oh, I could probably do this, and they apply, right? And so you have the time constraint. You have one woman, 50 men. Just by like law of averages alone, the chances that you find a qualified man are higher. And this is not because women are not qualified. It's just because of the numbers. So in the face of time pressure, you probably have this temptation. Oh, I should maybe make an exception because we need to build this product. But you go with no exceptions. How does one reconcile that?
Yeah, I think it's very easy, right? So it's like you said, it's very easy to fill a position, or rather easy, let's say, to fill a position with another male. But the problem is that if you have the more male male dominant teams you have, the harder will be to hire any female in the team.
Mm.
So it's very important to think about diversity from day one. I've tried to hire a female in a team of 10 people and failed miserably, just because when you have 10 male in a team, it's just impossible. Because the first question that you get is, how many females do you have? And I don't count as a manager. It's important to have other female engineers in the team. And because of that, you fail badly. So I think it's important to think about diversity from day one. And it's important to be very no exceptions, right? This position we're gonna block
Wow.
and only fill with female engineer.
And not just a female for the sake of a diversity quota, but a female who is equally as competent as the male applicants.
Exactly. That's hard. And I can tell you that I put a lot of effort in hiring, more effort than any other founder out there, just because of this. Because for me, it's important. And yeah, I think we need to change. We need to change that. And yeah, I can't change everything, but at least I can change what's happening in our company. And it's interesting that this also helps us with hiring. So if we outreach, we usually do outreach in order to find them, because usually they don't apply. And when we outreach, even then, most of the time, 90% of the time, they are not looking for another position, but they feel so tempted about working in Zeta because of the culture, because of, diversity. And yeah, even themselves, they always tell me that they are so productive and they are enjoying so much working together. And all of them, they never had the opportunity to work with another female engineer in their career.
Incredible. Well,
I think
listen,
even myself.
yeah. Well, listen, Monica. First of all, thank you. You came on here as somebody who's you're running a company. I know you've got tons and tons of meetings, but you're this absolutely talented founder and innovator who has been innovating straight out of college, from what I got to learn, and then to Oracle and Packetbeat and Elastic. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, and not just the journey, but the product placement for Zeta. But I don't mean that like disparagingly. It's a really compelling product, but also I think your commentary on diversity, inclusion, and the effort that it takes. It's true. I have firsthand experience, like watching you put more effort into that than almost everyone I've ever worked with who has to fill a position. And so, on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thank you so much for coming on this podcast and making the time to share this with us today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Tejas. And it was really great, the interview. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Monica Sarbu. I hope you learned a lot, not just about Postgres, but also about what it takes to run a company with diversity as a first class citizen, about inclusion, and about all of the things we discussed. It truly was a special discussion for me, and I hope it was for you. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, then I'd invite you to leave up to a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. It really does help the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, if you'd subscribe to the channel, like it, that would also help. And of course, if you want to share any of this on social media, that would help the most. I really believe in the work we're doing here, and I do want it to benefit a great majority of people. So if that's you or your friends, I'd really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you to the sponsors of this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.